Welcome to the DIY Goalie Podcast, where hosts and goalie coaches Nathan Park and Connor Monday share their insights on how to become a better goalie. Goalies, welcome back to another episode of the DIY Goalie Podcast presented by True North Goaltending. Hopefully, you guys are doing all good. It's crazy to think that we're like couple weeks out from the end of the season for a lot of us. I know some of the higher levels, you guys are still going to be going for a couple of months, but well, hopefully for a couple of months. But a lot of the younger goalies, the minor hockey goalies, really only have like maybe a month left, if that. So it's kind of crazy. It is, on one hand, nice for us because things start to slow down. It is definitely a grind during the season. But I find after Christmas just flies by. Like the fact that we're already kind of getting close to halfway through February is pretty crazy already. But hopefully you guys are doing good. I don't know what the weather is like around you guys, but it has been abnormally warm up around the Edmonton area for this time of year, which on one hand has been nice. On the other hand, it has been pretty slippery, just given everything melting and kind of refreezing at night. But that being said, the warm weather is nice. It's nice not having to bundle up in a jacket and a toque and mitts and all of that. So that's been a welcome change. But hopefully, you guys are kind of ready for the push to playoffs here. The last kind of couple weeks before things start to really get serious. But it is just me today, as you've probably figured out by now. It's Super Bowl Sunday. We have one of our billets who's from Seattle, and he's a Seahawks fan. So we are going to be watching the game with him. Connor is at work, so we couldn't really find the time to figure that out. But once the season kind of starts to wind down here, we will have a lot more time, and we'll actually, create a couple episodes ahead of time, so that we can get better with that, find some guests. It's easier in the off season too. But yeah, so today what I have for you guys is I've got a couple kind of habits that I want to present to you guys that are subtle, and they're not really technical. They kind of are, but it's more so how can we put ourselves into certain situations to get better without kind of actively thinking about getting better. So I'll kind of explain more as we go, but basically, what are some of the things that we can do and the situations we can put ourselves in to actually get better without focusing on, okay, how can I be more efficient on this push? How can I track the puck better? How can I do XYZ that's super technical? Because we have such a technical position, I think sometimes both on the goalie and the goalie coach slash goalie parent side of things, we tend to get a little too focused on the technical. And I'm definitely guilty of this both when I played and when I've coached. I've tried to do better as we've gone through the years on the coaching side of things, to not quite be so hammering on the technical side of things. That didn't really make any sense, but I didn't really have the words for it. Hopefully, you guys know what I meant there. But we've got a couple things that we want to go through. So, the first one that I kind of want to talk about in terms of a little shift in our habits, and take this with a grain of salt, and I don't want you guys to hear what I'm not saying, but we want to slow things down. We want to slow our game down. I have been working with a lot of goalies over the years, but I find especially lately, there's been a lot of goalies that I've been working with that are so worried about getting into their spot as quick as they can that the technique is completely out the window. And I find a lot of goalies kind of suffer from this mentality where it's like, I gotta go, I gotta go. And I kind of refer it to, as the goalie panic. And we have this tendency to not recognize how much time we actually have in a situation And I think we also underestimate our ability to get across the net or to be able to move in our net. And a lot of times, what happens with that is we end up getting to a situation where we try to go too fast and we actually end up either over sliding or putting ourselves out of position, or we push flat because we don't get a good rotation and we never get into position, or we do this big massive stretch and we leave holes like our 5 holes open, or between our arm and our pads, or between our arm and our body, or whatever the case is. We leave a lot of net open because we are trying to do too much. And I think we've seen it at the very least, and probably have had it happen to us. But I'm sure you guys have either seen or experienced the situation where a goalie stretches out, kind of half splits, and reaching with their glove, and then the player doesn't get enough of it, or they kind of hold it a little bit and they just send a little ice burner 5 hole or something like that, and it just looks kind of embarrassing when you look back and watch the footage on that. So um, a lot of times we don't actually have to do as much as we think we do. And we have kind of talked about this, especially, and this might be one we have to revisit because this episode is pretty old now, probably over a year old now. But we did an episode a while back on the efficiencies and how being efficient can make you a better goalie and what sort of efficiencies to look for. But when we slow our game down, it allows us to really focus on those efficiencies and make sure that we're hitting all of those points before we make our movements. Yes, there are some situations where if we do that, we will be late. And there is the odd time where a desperation kind of dive or splits or whatever the case is the right move. But we want to save that for the absolute like requirement for that save selection, I guess, right? Like we don't want to be going for a big dive or a big stretch across unless we are absolutely 100% sure that we are not going to get there in time otherwise. Because a lot of times goalies default to that and then they just kind of get themselves out of position and then it's just a scramble from there. So when you guys especially are in a practice setting, so whether it's a goalie session, whether it's at your practice or at the outdoor rink or whatever the case is, when it does not matter, really push yourselves to get across properly with good technique, which means slowing your game down. Take the time to look, take the time to rotate, take the time to push across, leading with the body, staying low, staying forward, getting a good hard stop, hitting your spot quick, being in position on angle square, all of that good stuff. Take the time to slow it down, get it right. And then what will end up happening is once you've kind of mastered that, your kind of learning curve goes real quick from there to be able to kind of speed up, right? So once that technique is down, once it starts clicking, the speed just ends up coming so quick from then on, like being able to do it faster and faster. So the earlier in your career that you can kind of hammer that habit home, the easier it will be to implement. It's really hard kind of the later that you go to be able to now try and stop yourself from doing the big explosive splits or dive or whatever across. So it's great if you can do that, but save it for when you absolutely need it. And that's kind of, I guess, our first, little habit. Makes a big difference, right? You do most of the time have more time than you think, and you can take that time to rotate. You can take that time to lead with your body instead of just stretching out, falling back on your butt or falling forward on your stomach, anything like that. Don't be afraid to slow it down, get the technique right first. The speed will come later. Another thing too that I've kind of, I don't know, come across lately, I guess, like one thing that I don't know, kind of stolen a little bit, but not really, just kind of built off of the idea, like thinking about habits and resets and kind of like our routines and stuff like that. one thing I've kind of been thinking about lately is this notion of like micro resets. So we always talk about resetting after a goal. Um, but one thing that's kind of intrigued me and is something um, that I think you guys can maybe try out. Definitely not something that's, a requirement or anything like that, but maybe something to play around with is this notion of micro resets. And that's finding a way to reset yourself, not only after a goal, but even after kind of every like sequence, right? So if you make a save and you put your rebound to the corner and you kind of, do your rotation and your push across, maybe when you get set at the end of that push, kind of if you have a little something to help you kind of reset back on that puck, right? And this can be different for everybody. Like if you want to do it after every shot or every sequence, that's great. If you want to do it each time the puck is coming towards your zone, that's great too. If you don't want to implement it at all and you don't think it's for you, then that's fine too. But wanted to put it out there because there might be a few goalies out there that might find this useful. But it's kind of the idea of, we always talk about having the mind of a goldfish and that next shot mentality where we're only really worried about the next shot coming up. We're not worried about what's happened in the past. Having that kind of mental reset, not just after a goal, but kind of either after a shot or a sequence or each time the puck comes into our zone, can almost help us kind of keep in that mindset and keep it consistent, right? Because I have a couple goalies I'm working with that this season that can play really well for like 40 minutes or 50 minutes of a game most of the time, but there's always like a 10 to 20, maybe a 5 minute stretch where there's a bit of struggles. And so that's where I think sometimes this notion of micro resets can maybe be useful, right? So it helps you kind of stay engaged. It helps you kind of, you know, keep reminding yourself of what the goal is, keep you in the moment, keep you in the game, right? And it's going to vary for everybody, but something you can maybe play around with. And it can be something like just a quick little, like, 2 or 3 breath breathing sequence, or maybe something like you utter one word to yourself or something like that. Like maybe after you make a save, you just kind of softly to yourself say next shot. And that's your kind of reset. That's your mental cue that, like, okay, that's done. Now I got to work on what's next, what's in front of me, right? And whatever works for you guys, again, play around with it. But it's something that I never really had thought about before. And, it kind of heard, stuff about like face off resets and stuff like that, and diving kind of more down the rabbit hole. I'm curious to see if any goalies might find this approach useful. So if you guys are, you know, wanting to try something new, try it out. And if it works well for you, let me know. You can always send us an email at like goalies@truenorthgoaltending.com. And also, I'd be curious to know if you did try it out and it was absolutely terrible for you. So it's something that I'm going to kind of be talking to my goalies about a little bit when we talk about the mental side of things, and kind of put it out there for them to see if it works. Because I do think there are some goalies out there that it would benefit. I also know that there would be a lot of goalies out there that it's not for them whatsoever. Me being one of them, I was always one that if I had a completely blank mind, that was when I played the best. So that's kind of what I tried to do. But I know some goalies really like kind of that, consistent routine to help them kind of snap back into the moment, snap back into focus. So something to try out there. Just those like little micro resets during a game. That also kind of leads me towards my next point, which is a little bit of a kind of overlapping habit or whatever it is you want to call these, but something that you can do at home, um, or at practice, or whenever basically that you have the time to, is
putting yourself in situations where you're bored and training yourself to be okay with, or I guess training yourself to stay focused when there's not a whole lot going on, right? Um, we've all been there. We've had games where we maybe get like 5, 6 shots. It's not the most fun. And a lot of times those are the games that we let in like 2 or 3 out of the 5 or 6 shots. Um, the other thing too is we kind of talked about this a couple weeks ago, but the way the game is shifting, and this was the expectations of goaltending episode that we had. The way the game is shifting, and the fact that players and teams are trying to capture um, the high quality chances as opposed to quantity of chances. A lot of times we might not see very many shots in a game these days, but they might, 80% of them might be high danger chances. And so it's really hard sometimes to stay engaged when you're not getting a lot of action, but then the action that you do get is high quality. So if you guys can put yourselves in situations when you're like where you're a little bit bored, where you're, trying to keep your mind engaged, that's a skill that if you can figure out what works best for you, that's going to translate extremely well for when you're on the ice. It's going to basically give you a sense of, how can I stay in the moment, stay engaged, be on the puck, even if the puck's not in my end very much? How am I still able to kind of stick with it and, be mentally ready for when something does happen, like a turnover leading to a breakaway or whatever the case is? Um, so we have talked lots about the concentration grids. That's a good one to kind of, help yourself keep focused and be able to, um, you know, keep yourself occupied, tracking items, stuff like that. But if you just even, try and create a mindset of boredness. So, like, even if you're like laying in bed or something like that, and you take 15, 20 minutes to just lay there and kind of be bored or whatever the case is, however it works for you. But if you can figure out a way to get yourself in that state of mind where there's nothing really going on and you're kind of a little like, what do I do? I'm not really, like, I don't have time to do this, and kind of in limbo, not sure what to do, getting a little bit bored. And then you can kind of figure out what works for you in terms of keeping yourself focused. So, like, I know one of the In Goal magazine podcast episodes from probably sometime last year that had Nicole Schroeder on. She was talking about how when the play was in the other end, she would do play by play of the game, and that would keep her engaged, right? So again, that might work for some goalies, but for other goalies, that sounds terrible, right? So that's why if you can put yourself in these sort of situations and kind of figure out A, what your mind does naturally, and B, figure out if that natural like reaction to being bored is beneficial or not, and then C, working towards figuring out what is beneficial and kind of what keeps you engaged when your mind is starting to wander, when you get a little bored. So that's something, if you guys can really figure out and really hone in for yourselves, that's going to be an invaluable skill to learn as a goalie, because it is so much about being focused, being ready for that next shot. Because we've all been there. Like, things happen quick on the ice, like split seconds, right? And that split second of not being focused, all of a sudden that puck's in the net. And then we kind of kick ourselves after the fact because we're like, like I was there, I just wasn't like ready, like I wasn't mentally there, right? And that can be frustrating as a goalie. So if you can hone in that skill of being able to, figure things out when there's not a whole lot going on and keep yourself engaged, that is something that I think is invaluable as a skill. The other thing that we can do too, and these next two kind of tie in together a little bit to themselves as well, but um, not being the best on the ice or not being the best in the gym or in the room or whatever the case is, right? We talk about this when it comes to, learning or business or anything like that, where we want to surround ourselves with, the people that we want to be, or, we never want to be the smartest person in the room or whatever, right? Because if there's people around us that are smarter or better or you know have a little bit more experience or wisdom or whatever the case is, that creates an environment for us to have better development, right? So it's the same thing when it comes to goaltending or hockey or basically anything, right? If you can go out there, if you can go out for a practice or a camp or something like that and not be the best goalie on the ice, that's going to be a fast track for you to be able to get better. You're going to learn a lot from the other athletes that you're with that are at a higher skill set. You can learn to see what habits they're doing, what, you know, dedication they have to getting better. You can kind of, figure out like reverse engineer what they're doing and see how you can apply it to your game. The other thing is too with shooters, right? If you're constantly facing shooters that are better than the level that you normally play, that's going to drastically help in your development too. You're going to pick up on how they release the puck. You're going to pick up on how they read the player, how they make passes, right? You're going to pick up on their ability to fake you out, stuff like that. And that's all learning and experience that you can take. Even if you're getting lit up and you're not, you know, doing very well, that's okay because there are still things you can take away from there. Um, so if you have any opportunities to not be the best in a situation, whether it's on the ice, in the gym, all of the things we talked about there, that's an environment that's going to help you develop, and that's good to do. You want to make sure that you're putting yourselves in those situations to help develop your skill sets better. That also kind of ties into slightly this next point, which is embracing kind of the unorthodox situations, right? So stay out late if your team is sticking around for practice, like maybe coach ends your practice early and you have like 10 minutes and your team wants to do a shootout. There are some goalies out there that are like, no, I don't want to do that. Me personally, when I played, I loved that stuff. And I think that was a big reason why I got to the level I did and had the skill set I did, because I was constantly searching for that stuff. Now, me personally, I hated going to the gym, but I could go out to the outdoor rink for like 5 or 6 hours in a row and just play shinny or take shootouts or 2-on-0s or whatever. I lived for that stuff, and it's not the goalie friendly stuff. And there's a lot of goalies that hate being put in those situations. But I'm telling you, the skills that you develop from kind of that unstructured hockey, the skills you develop from just being able to, improvise, to read the play, to anticipate all of that stuff that comes from stuff like shootouts or shinny or going to the outdoor rink or playing 3-on-3, stuff like that. That sort of skill set that you develop can be invaluable because, again, we're not working necessarily on any specific technique, but your body is starting to recognize, like, each time you're out on the ice, your brain kind of subconsciously takes a little bit more information in. And over the years, it starts to use that information to be able to be more accurate with how it responds to stuff like shots or passes. It becomes quicker at processing that information so that you can, have an output quicker. So whether it's moving your hands or, rotating your body or whatever the case is, that sort of stuff, that process happens quicker the more that your body sees it and is able to kind of, you know, put that in its bank, I guess, that it can use for later. So, um, any chance you get, obviously, to the point, like, we don't want to, enable burnout or get to the point that we're injuring ourselves or anything like that. But we do need to kind of embrace those situations. And I think we need to do a better job as a goalie community. Like, there are some goalies that are great with it, and they'll sit there and they'll play every small area game and every shootout. But there are a lot of goalies that are just like, no, like, that sounds terrible. Why would I do that? No, I'm not staying out for a shootout or whatever the case is. And I do think that those goalies are missing out on the ability to develop those skills that we talked about. So it's kind of like one of the earlier episodes that we had in the podcast where we had Ian Gordon on. His piece of advice that he kind of gave was embracing the development mindset. And that's kind of like any chance you're on the ice is a chance to get better, right? So it's kind of the same thing here. Like, even if you're not specifically working on, a certain technique, or if you're not, doing skating drills or specific goalie drills, just being on the ice and, messing around and kind of seeing 5 backdoor passes in a row that you're trying to catch your edge and push back to because your players are screwing around in front of the net at the end of the practice or whatever the case is. That sort of stuff, believe it or not, can actually significantly improve your skill set, right? Your ability to catch an edge and push back, catch an edge, push back, and stay on balance, doing that 5 or 6 times back and forth when it's a 2-on-0 in front. That's the sort of stuff that, although you might still get scored on and it might be frustrating and it might not be very game realistic, you still develop a lot of skills from that. Your skating ability, your ability to lead with your body, your ability to, anticipate plays and read the play, your ability to make saves, all of that stuff can be built even on a subconscious level just from being in these situations. So, um, last thing that I kind of have here is just the constant pursuit of learning and being a student of the game. I think we have one of the most cerebral positions in sports. There's so much that we have to process inside of our brain during a game. There's 10 bodies, potentially 11 bodies flying around us in the zone, plus the puck, right? There's, pucks hitting off shin pads, hitting off stanchions, there's passes, there's guys from, D-men from the blue line that are dropping down low to the back door and then coming back out. Your defenseman's trying to box somebody out in front who's also trying to be a screen and a tip option, right? There's all this stuff that goes on. And the more that we can understand the game, the more that we can make better decisions when that comes to light, right? Because if you think about it, all of our games when we play are just a series of split-second decisions, right? Guy walks out of the corner. Are you going to the overlap? Are you staying in the RVH? There's a guy back door. Is he a lefty? Is he a righty? Am I going to now hinge back and be flat a little bit to kind of cheat to the pass a little bit? But that leaves now, that far side open for the shot. So how much am I going to hinge back? How much am I staying square to that puck? Right? This is all stuff that your brain processes and tries to make a decision in, like, a tenth of a second. And so the more that we can understand the game, the more we can understand and recognize patterns, and like tendencies of players or teams or your own team, your own players, that sort of stuff, the better that you'll be at making those decisions real time in a game. So constantly watching hockey, we talk about this lots, but actually sitting down, watching hockey, watching what the players are doing, right? The Olympics are on right now. So the women's hockey is already going. Men's hockey is going to be, in a few days after release of this podcast. So the more that you guys can kind of, start to understand what's going on. So watch the game, see what the players are doing and see what the goalie's doing as a reaction, right? How are they moving in terms of, or in relation to where the puck is, and, you know, see when they're taking more depth, when they're taking less depth, see when they're, coming off their post in the RVH versus on their feet, or transitioning into their post on their feet or in the RVH, right? Take a look and see when are they shoulder checking, right? Take a look and see where they're playing when they're killing a penalty, stuff like that, right? And talk to your goalie coaches, talk to goalies older than you, talk to other goalies the same age and level as you, and start to kind of learn a little bit from them, and understand the why behind what we do as goalies, and even talk to players and like player coaches and stuff like that, and try and get their perspective. What are you guys looking to do? How are you trying to open up the net? Or how are you trying to deceive us goalies to try and score, right? Like, you can have those conversations with people within your circle and start to understand, the percentages, start to understand what's, the best option in certain situations, because hockey and goaltending is very situational. And that's where kind of being able to make those decisions comes into play. So if you kind of understand, like, okay, the puck's in this area, there's no backside threat. Okay, I can take a half step out and be off of my post in the overlap. Or, okay, there's a 2-on-1 coming down on me. I got to get out to get some momentum back, but I can't get out too far because there's that pass threat on the back door. Oh, that backside guy is a lefty and he's on his one-time side. Okay, I got to recognize that I must be ready for a one-timer shot, right? So these are the things that the more that you can understand how things play out and what the best way to kind of react to that as a goalie are, the easier and the quicker you can make those decisions when they come into play in a game. So that's kind of what I have for that. Just in terms of some small habits that we can do to kind of help make our game better. So slowing our game down, the micro resets, making yourself bored, not being the best on the ice or in the gym, embracing the unorthodox situations, and becoming a student of the game. If you guys can start to kind of find ways to weave in these habits into your game, I think you'll see quite a big difference in terms of, your success, and kind of where you get to in terms of your development. So thanks again for listening today, guys. That's all I got for you. Just a reminder, we do have our 3 camps up and ready for booking. So August 8th, 9th, we have a U9, U11 kind of beginner camp. August 10th to 14th is our main kind of hockey goalie camp, which is already half booked. So there's only 12 spots left there. And then we have a ringette camp August 21st to 23rd. All 3 of those are going to be in Beaumont, so just southeast of Edmonton. And each day has 2.5 hours on ice, 2 hours off ice, so an hour of cognitive and an hour of strength and flexibility training, as well as an hour of classroom session. We provide lunch, we provide snacks, we provide jerseys, workout gear, all of that stuff. It's always a fun time. We get lots of good feedback from the development that the goalies get. Lots of goalies fall asleep on the drive home at the end of the day, we were told. So it's a really good time. And if you guys are looking for good, solid development, we are always about quality over quantity. We'll never put more than 12 goalies on the ice. We'll never do more than a 3-to-1 goalie to coach ratio. And we try and implement some things that some of the other places don't. All of our puck drills are always videoed. Our on ice is half puck drills, half skating drills. So there's lots of work on our skating. So it's always a good time, and goalies get a lot of work and definitely get a lot of development throughout the week. So you can check that out at truenorthgoaltending.com/Edmonton-goalie-camps. We'll put that in the show notes too, or you can just kind of head to truenorthgoaltending.com and in the menu find goalie camps too. That works. And then while you're there, you can kind of check out our merch, check out our drills, kind of our articles, all the stuff we got going on there. As always, guys, thanks for tuning in. Leave us a follow or a subscribe, depending on the platform you are listening and tuning into. Share the show with a friend. You can like us or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Although Instagram, we are at YEG Goalie Coach. Everything else is at True North Goaltending. If you have any questions or you kind of want something featured on the show, reach out to goalies at truenorthgoaltending.com, and I'll read those and kind of give you an answer or maybe feature you guys on the show. But other than that, hopefully you guys have a good kind of wind down of the season, playoff push here, a good Valentine's Day, all of that good stuff. Thanks for tuning in, goalies. Make some saves. Take care.